First up in this session on the equine industry in a changing world, I'm delighted that we have Lord Benyon here today, who's going to give us the Defra view about many issues affecting the equine world. So Lord Benyon, if you'd like to come and make your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. And good morning, everyone. How fitting it is that the news editor of Horse and Hound won that competition. We'll have to see whether she can keep this up with her questions. I've asked myself several questions, which I hope we'll be able to answer later. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you today. And I'm delighted to attend the 30th National Equine Forum. I congratulate the forum on its 30th anniversary, and long may its success continue for the next 30 years and beyond. Just to introduce myself, I was appointed into this role. The formal title of my role, I have to read this because I can never remember it, Minister responsible for Rural Affairs, Access to Nature and Biosecurity. But what I really am is the Minister for the Horse, and it is in that capacity that I'm talking to you today. Until 2019, I was a Member of Parliament, and I represented the Newbury constituency, which includes, as you know, one of the country's leading racecourses, and the Lambourne Valley. Between 800 and 1,000 of my constituents were employed in the racing industry, and many more in other areas of the equine world. And so through that experience and the fact that I have been on or around a horse since before I can remember, it is an enormous delight now to have responsibility for this area and to try and move things forward and the words "in a changing world" I think has never been more apt. And so I totally recognise the importance of this forum to the equine industry and the wide variety of subjects that it covers. This year is no exception, with a very full and interesting programme, and I'm sure this will generate engaging discussions throughout the day and encourage and enable collaboration and some new approaches to tackling that fast-changing world. The equine industry makes a significant contribution to the UK economy. At an estimated £4.7 billion in consumer spending across a range of goods and services each year. And of course, the equine industry is the largest importer and exporter of livestock. I was staggered to find out that £2.8 billion is spent every year on horse upkeep in Britain. It's a staggering statistic. Animal health and welfare is absolutely at the forefront of my department and the government's priorities, and we want to make sure that we are benefiting the approximately 850,000 horses that exist in Britain. Changes to import and export requirements following our EU exit, real progress in relation to equine welfare legislation, identification and traceability building back from the COVID-19 pandemic, all of these have a significant effect on our many riding schools, competition and racing yards, breeders, welfare centres and private horse owners. Much of this progress we are making is underpinned by the excellent working relationship that we continue to uphold with many representatives across that industry. I've also had the pleasure of meeting with the British Horse Council towards the end of last year, and it's very good to see them, some of them who were on that call, three-dimensionally, and it's great to be meeting for so many of you three-dimensionally, because we're all, I think, have had it up to here with Zoom and Teams. And to actually meet you and to discuss things, you do make so much more progress, not just in the sessions that you hold here, but over coffee and discussions later. And that level of collaboration is the strength of this forum. It's so good that you've progressed meeting in person here. I'm so grateful to the British Horse Council for very useful discussions we've had on equine identification and traceability, and the work they've done with the EFRA Committee's report on moving animals across borders. In relation to these, I'm pleased to confirm that we are in the process of publishing a 12-week public consultation on equine identification and traceability to shape the future in this area. There are a few more approval steps, but I expect these to be completed very shortly. We will consult on proposals to make it easier for horse owners and keepers to update records on the central equine database. We believe this will greatly improve the accuracy of the data we hold on equines in order to support traceability for welfare and biosecurity purposes. Other proposals include the recording of a horse's habitual location and possibly temporary locations to assist with handling and vitally to contain disease outbreaks. There is also the possibility of introducing temporary identification for certain situations such as emergency care for abandoned horses. We will also be seeking views on proposed links to other databases and digitalisation to speed up the processes. Whilst the consultation will focus on the position in England, and we are keen to significantly increase the digitisation of identification, there are, let's be frank, constraints on our scope to do this. Any changes we make must take account of the position of those countries where we move our horses to most often. The EU and Northern Ireland, and of course our devolved administrations in Wales and Scotland. Alongside the issue of increased digitisation of equine ID, we're exploring with the EU the scope for the digital transfer of export health certificates, known as e-certification, to streamline the movement of equines across borders. And there's an animal welfare issue here as well, as has been pointed out to me by a great many people. The central equine database and the digital stable continue to be developed to enable support for an e-certification system for international horse movements, working with Equine Register, who manage these, of course, with Defra. Linked with this, we are also working with various industry groups, including Weatherbys, Fédération Équestre Internationale, and the World Horse Welfare, to explore options for ensuring that once the ban on live exports for slaughter and fattening is introduced, there is a robust mechanism for enabling only bona fide movements, e.g. for racing, competition, sales, breeding, and other like activities to take place with high standards of health and welfare. And it's very good to see the participation today of the Northern Irish and Republic of Ireland Chief Veterinary Officers, and we are very open to continued dialogue with them at this very important time. From a government perspective, ID and traceability, the movement of equines and the enhancements to regulation of our import and export trade are key elements to support equine welfare, the equine landscape, and the around 27 million people in Britain with an interest in the equestrian industry. 27 million people. Also linked in with equine ID and traceability is our work to support the equine element of the animal health and welfare pathway. I welcome the industry's enthusiasm on this, and I look forward to hearing from the British Horse Council later this morning on this as a joint industry government initiative. I also welcome the discussions later today on the industry's disease surveillance, on anthelmintic resistance, with the Veterinary Medicines Directorate playing a leading role. Losing effective antibiotics or wormers is a major threat to all those who care about horses. And this is, I've been told already this morning, one of the most important veterinary issues that we're facing, with horses already dying from resistance, and we have to get this right. I also look forward to seeing progress with our common goals to deliver healthier, higher welfare animals. And I know that the Council and others are networked into our One Health agenda. For too long, animal health has been the Cinderella area of health. And now this global One Health initiative, absolutely vital. COVID has brought this home to us, and suddenly animal health is important. The impact of zoonotic diseases and the investment we are making as a government in science, in our science real estate, as well as our human capital, is really important. And it's absolutely vital that equines and equine health is at the heart of that. The government also really appreciates the important work that responsible animal welfare establishments do often on a voluntary basis to ensure that unwanted and abandoned horses in the UK are offered an opportunity for a forever home. As set out in the Action Plan for Animal Welfare last year, we are pursuing the licensing of animal welfare establishments, including for equines. We are engaging with relevant organisations to understand their views and the possible impacts of regulating the sector. Any proposals to bring forward licensing regulations will, of course, be subject to consultation. Whether a business asset or a companion, ridden or retired, admired while roaming our countryside, or for winning the Grand National, the horse has a very special place in our hearts. As Helen Thompson once said, in riding a horse, we borrow freedom. So finally, in terms of access, I'm sure you'll agree with the government's recent changes to the Highways Code and to the 2026 deadline for the rights of way that will benefit horse riders. With all the important work that the government is doing in collaboration with the industry to enhance equine trade, to improve equine welfare, and to protect equine health and national herd, we have something to be proud of and a continued work to do together. Tim, you started by mentioning the global crisis we face. And I think that one of the commodities that's perhaps most in need at the moment is hope. And I found a wonderful quote by Tony Robinson. She said, "Horses change lives. They give our young people confidence and self-esteem. They provide peace and tranquility to troubled souls. They give us hope. Let's all use whatever we can to give ourselves some hope in these troubled times." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. There'll be no questions now. There is a panel session after we've heard from, we'll call them a brace of Chief Veterinary Officers. So first up, we've got Martin Blake from the Chief Veterinary Officer for Ireland. And Martin's going to give us some reflections from Ireland, because it's easy to forget with COVID and Ukraine about the huge monumental changes that have been with Brexit that have ongoing issues that sometimes need still to be addressed. Martin, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Really delighted to be here today, and really thank the organisers for the invitation. I think when the conference was being organised, I think the reference to changing times probably hadn't envisaged what we're seeing across Eastern Europe today, and I'd associate myself with the comments of the Chairman and previous speaker. Some of you may not know, but just in the context of, I start off by just talking about the industry in Ireland, if that's okay. It actually quite replicates the industry within Britain as well. There's culture and tradition behind it. It's not a homogeneous industry. There's various sectors ranging from the thoroughbred to the sport horse, to the leisure, to the pony clubs, and also a cultural element of keeping of horses from different types of communities. It is a very strong thoroughbred industry, which is focused a lot on exports. I think more than 80% of the thoroughbreds bred in Ireland are exported. Also maybe just give a pen picture of the demographics of breeders. Some of these large breeding establishments are often seen as elite and big, but the reality on the ground is that 92% of breeders have less than 5 mares. So it is something that is actually happening in every county in Ireland. on farms where people are also farming cattle or horticulture or whatever. So these are primarily a farming industry in breeding of sport horses and thoroughbreds. It's a very significant employer in rural areas. In the context of the thoroughbred industry in particular, it's envisaged that somewhere in the region of 29,000 people are employed directly or indirectly. And as I alluded to earlier, I mean, trade is a big driver of this and a big focus of the breeding industry. Just referring back to the culture and tradition element, I think it is reported that in the context of the first steeplechase, it took place in County Cork, and it involved a Mr. O'Callaghan and a Mr. Blake, no relation. When I was actually asked to do this talk, I just sat and thought about it in the context of the external influences that have impacted on a changing world. There's a danger when we actually think about this that we start from a recency bias, that we just think of things that are actually impacting on us now. So I thought maybe just to reflect on a broader issue. What were these type of issues that were actually impacting on us and on the industry? Obviously, SARS-CoV-19 has impacted across the world and across the industries. Whilst the thoroughbred industry in Ireland managed to continue with its racing activities, there was a significant impact on the sport horse competition, particularly the lower level sport horse, pony clubs and things like that. And that impacted on both the horses and the environment and their owners. We then have also, I suppose, maybe both international, domestic and global economic issues. We then... I forgot my glasses. So I'm going to turn around. The political and geographical issues, and we'll talk a little bit about the EU-UK dynamic. We also have what's happening in Eastern Europe at the moment. We also have the US and China engagements. Climate is particularly relevant in the context of all farming activities. So it may not have much an impact on the monogastric equine, but a lot of our farmers have livestock as well, or ruminant livestock. One Health mentioned as well in the context of concerns about zoonoses. We'll talk about various legislations, and I suppose within Ireland, the legislation impacts both domestic and EU legislation. We looked in at social concerns and social perspectives. So what society is thinking relates into this whole issue of social license and the commentary that people have about the horse industry, and then. I suppose then the impact of social media in particular, but media and how they influence people's thinking. So I just populated those with some thoughts in the context of energy and inflation, the availability of workers, as I mentioned, the EU, Russia, UK, Russia, Ukraine dynamic, US and China. The animal health feed issues, you'll recall there was a feed issue in France there last year in the context of contaminated feed. The change in climate, the change in vector distribution, concerns about animal health. As I mentioned, zoonoses, animal welfare, and matters like that. So then I just tried to bring all these back into current topical issues in Ireland. And again, as Lord Benyon mentioned, issues in relation to identification, movement and trade, the EU-UK dynamic, animal health issues, climate, animal welfare. So I propose to focus the rest of my talk on a number of these areas: identification, movement, EU-UK, animal health, societal, animal welfare and societal concerns, and vet meds. So just in the context of the trade issue, when I was thinking about this, a phrase came into my head: everything has changed, and I recalled it from some poem somewhere in the past. I was talking to my daughter. I said, what poet quoted this? Wasn't it W.B. Yeats? She said, no, that was Swift. I said, Jonathan Swift. No, she said Taylor Swift. So So there's a generational issue here. So apparently they're both correct. I mean, we have faced, everything has changed. I mean, in the context of prior to this, horses moved back and forth between Britain and Ireland seamlessly. You just needed your passport available to go. Now there's introduction of inspection and official certification. We then had to deal with the whole licensing of transporters. Transporters needed to be licensed to operate in UK and licensed to operate in the EU. There was significant work between Defra, ourselves, and our colleagues, Robert's colleagues in Northern Ireland, to actually ensure that the transporters that have moved back and forth between the jurisdictions are actually were dual licensed in the beginning of the year. We had issues around laboratories and ensuring that laboratories were appropriately approved, so that both they could be used, the results could be used both within GB and within EU. A need to pre-notify exports into GB from the Irish perspective. With imports, horses had to come through border control posts, and at the moment that's not a requirement moving from Ireland to GB. The introduction of tax and VAT issues. This is completely new. Again, something new. It is a matter of, it's a transactional thing in the context of application of value-added tax and engagement with revenue for the industry. And then a significant impact on land bridge. Heretofore, I'd say 99% of horses moving from and to Ireland from the rest of the EU transited through GB. That has been substantially changed now. So I suppose the big issue is there's a time cost, there's a financial cost, there's an admin burden, but there's actually a move towards dealing. This is the way we deal with other markets, and it is settling down, and people have got used to it, and the trade is actually continuing. I think we also have to be conscious of the whole societal interests and concerns about our industries. The type of things people talk to us about are food safety, food authenticity, and this goes back to the 2013 issue around the contamination of meat, with mixing of different meats in meat preparations. The whole issue of antimicrobial resistance. And integrity around competition. I mean, society takes a significant interest around the integrity around competition. And all this is actually moved around the place and distributed through social media. And not just social media. I mean, the mainstream media actually write a lot of this as well, and a lot, particularly at the weekends. And obviously, within the societal concerns and interests, animal welfare is a big issue. So maybe just move on to talk a little about animal welfare. I mean, there's been a lot of focus both in relation to the on-farm animal welfare issues, competition, and during transport. And we have a tradition in Ireland of an urban horse-type situation, where in large cities and in some of the larger towns and the outskirts of them, people keep horses, and to some extent they become a nuisance for other people. And then this leads to a lot of straying horses as well. And we had a significant problem back in 2012 or thereabouts in relation to abandonment of horses. So there was a significant work involved in actually trying to bring balance back into production versus usability. We're also conscious at the moment, the European Parliament passed a motion recently in relation to transport of all animals, but one of the significant issues that could impact on the horse industry in particular would be movement in the last trimester of pregnancy. Now obviously that's not law, but the EU Commission are currently evaluating and reviewing all animal welfare law in EU, and obviously the Parliament's view will feed into that consideration. The Commission are also actually getting input from EFSA and have indicated like that whatever law will be brought forward will be science-informed and science-based. We recently authorised officers in the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Body, that's the old Turf Club as well, gave them powers, national powers as authorised officer under animal health and welfare legislation to carry out inspections in relation to animal welfare. Horse Racing Ireland, that oversees racing and thoroughbred racing in Ireland, in their most recent strategic plan, have focused very much on welfare and the retraining and repurposing of retired racehorses. And they have set up an Irish Thoroughbred Welfare Council, which advises them on that. And also most recently last year, in the context of EU Reference Centre, University College Dublin is part of a consortium that was assigned the EU reference centre for ruminant and equine welfare. So there's significant work and interest in this space. So it's within Ireland, it's becoming a greater concern, a greater interest, and greater activity. Animal health is always an issue, and there are various things across the animal health space that people are concerned about, be it from either diseases themselves or surveillance or biosecurity, or the use of vet meds or antimicrobial resistance or antiparasitic resistance, the One Health issues, and then feeding into food safety, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the safety of feed. So I'll just reference a little bit in relation to the new EU vet med regulations, which came through last year and became law in Ireland in January. They were designed to create the increased availability of vet meds across the EU, make it easier to actually ensure that within a small market like Ireland, that vet meds would be available. They're also focused on reducing antimicrobial usage, which as a proxy of to deal with antimicrobial resistance issues. So a net effect is that antimicrobial prescriptions are now valid for only 5 days after they're being issued. So you must actually get your prescription filled within 5 days. You don't necessarily have to use it within 5 days. The treatment could be for a month or whatever, but that must be dispensed within 5 days. There are significant controls put on veterinarians in the context of prophylactic or metaphylactic use of antibiotics. They need to be able to justify these and keep records as to why they would. It also impacts on the use of the cascade in the context of non-availability of drugs for the specific species, minority species, as they say in the context of equines. So there's a different pathway there. Which does actually in some way allow easier importation of drugs that may not be available. Also, it has focusing on ensuring that the exclusion from the food chain must be notified to the central database, and no longer is discretion of the owner to actually exclude an animal from the food chain. It must be done on the basis of a treatment. Two recent specific issues in Ireland: we're upregulating antiparasitic medicines on the basis of the antiparasitic restrictions. Heretofore, they were not prescription only; they were derogated. So now that from June, they will require prescription across all species. And we have authorised recently staff of the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board to be authorised officers under the Animal Medicines Regulations, so they can go onto all premises where the horses are kept to actually carry out controls. On identification, I think as Lord Benyon mentioned, we too are looking at habitual residence issues. New EU requirement. It challenges our database, and so we will be redeveloping our database to actually try and bring that into real-time effect. We already had premises registration in place. We carried out a census this year. First time we've done a census. We're just getting the data back, so it'll give us some sense of numbers of horses in real time. The longer term goal is to develop a central database to allow keepers update the habitual residence. Significant clarity in relation to record keeping. I won't go through them in detail, but essentially it's clear now what record keeping keepers must keep. Just briefly touch on the high health status. This is provided for within the EU law. It allows premise to be validated, extend the validity of a health certificate from 10 to 30 days. And we're working on a new system in relation to the award of the validation marks. This can be done through some of the control agencies like the FEI or whatever. And finally, just to talk on the equine electronic passport, is something we're working towards as well. We've engaged with industry. We have further engagements during the course of the summer. We see great value in this in the context of actually reducing paperwork. There's a long way to go still to make it fully operational. The current legislative basis would suggest that this happens in parallel with the current paper passport. But I mean, I think once it's up and running and can prove itself, hopefully we will actually be able to deliver on that. So that's a quick run through of a whole range of issues that are actually bothering us these days in the context of the horse industry. So thanks very much for the opportunity to come, and hope you found it of some interest. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Martin. Again, we'll have a panel session after we've heard from Robert Huey, who's going to talk about the value of a horse and economic strategy for Northern Ireland. Robert, welcome.
Lord Benyon, Martin, thanks very much. And apologies to the organisers. I'm not speaking to the theme. I'm going to talk about something completely different. I'm going to talk about the value of a horse and an economic strategy. A colleague, good friend, economist, agriculturalist, what am I doing wrong? Always says the first thing you need to do is work out what the problem is you're trying to solve. Very often important people like ministers will say to officials like me, this is a very important problem, we must do something about it. So officials go away and have to do something about it. But usually the most important thing you do is actually try and work out what the problem is you're trying to solve. And the problem we're trying to solve here is complex, what they call nowadays a wicked problem, I suppose. But the basis of it is in poor profitability for the sector and people getting by. And part of the roots of that are in government. Government doesn't understand the equine industry, the equine sector certainly doesn't understand government or how to ask sensible questions. And I'm in an unfortunate position of understanding both languages, which is why I'm arrogant enough to think that maybe I can do something about this. The relationship is very interesting. The sector is very fractured. It suffers from a lack of leadership. And very often you get to a position where the person across the table you're consulting with is really talking about themselves. And that is a common problem we have within the equine sector. There's also a gross inferiority complex because Martin and his department support the equine sector in Northern Ireland, I think quite generously. The sector, of course, would say they don't give them half enough, but they do. And they look over here and see a thriving sector, and they have this inferiority complex, which doesn't help when you're trying to go forward. This fractured bit is an interesting thing. We have 35,000 horses and well over 30 organisations representing them. Where one or two are gathered together like the nonconformist church to form another church, and this is much the same. And if you look at the bottom there, you'll see my interest, the Irish Draft. Northern Ireland has two Irish Draft societies. The Irish Draft Horse Society Northern Ireland, not to be confused with the Irish Draft Horse Society Ireland, and the Irish Draft Horse Breeders Association, which has a branch of another group in the south. Yeah. We look over the border, we see a very well organised thoroughbred sector. We see Horse Racing Ireland. We see the Irish Thoroughbred Breeders Association, very professional, very well run, and they're good enough to include Northern Ireland within their remit. And we benefit greatly from that. Similar in the sport horse side, Horse Sport Ireland has a Northern Ireland relationship. But again, we always feel we're the added on. We don't play as equals, we play as very much coming to the table with a begging bowl. And it's not a great place to be. And we've got Ulster Rural Riders, and we also then, of course, the GB, the British Horse Society, comes right across all the islands and does a great job and are very active, and Susan really tries to pull people together. But the point I'm trying to make is a very fractured stakeholder group. So we need a strategy, and we had one back in 2007. And a very good strategy, collaboratively put together, and its main outcome was the formation of an Equine Council for Northern Ireland that brought all the groups together. And it didn't work. It was meetings of unequal parties. The thoroughbred looked across at the sport horse and went, what are we doing with these amateurs? Afraid they're going to be pulled down. The sport horse people felt they weren't being properly represented, and then you got into the different species groups and the pony club and people, and just the chairman, Jeff Cannon from the thoroughbred, the secretary, David Kirkpatrick, who's done everything there is to do in sport horses, did their best to pull it together and make it work. But finally they came to my permanent secretary and said, permanent secretary, do something, we need help. Permanent Secretary came to me and said, Robert, you understand these people and make it go away, basically. So like a good public servant, what do you do when you've got a problem? You get the consultants in. Because I had the sense to know that I had no figures. You know, Lord Benyon gave the very impressive figures for GB, and Martin gave the figures for the South. I had no figures. I knew I had 35,000 horses-ish, not quite sure where they were, but I think that's the number I had, but no value. So you know, we have an opportunity. We have good horses, we have enthusiastic people, we have, when you go to the Dublin Horse Show, you know, we look at Group 1 winners, for the size of the place, we put our strength, but it's very much done on the people, really, rather than any support or any great help. And we have one jewel in our crown, which is the Defra, which is Deirdre's own equine college. The Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has its own college for horticulture and for farmers. It has one for food in the food chain, and also has one for equines, and those are within Deirdre, and they are little jewels when it comes to knowledge transfer and trying to improve knowledge within very, very diverse industries. So Deloitte went away, did their magic, did a really good survey that had a really good return. They couldn't believe the number of people who actually turned in the survey, and a lot of us put in a lot of work driving people to fill in the survey online, and they did so. And we got to a figure of 212 million, which I was quite pleased with until I heard Lord Benyon's 2.8 billion of sales, and Martin's huge figure. But 212 million for sales, and this is all this is what people spend on their horses. You know, a farm gate sales for milk in Northern Ireland is 800 million. We've got 1.7 million people in Northern Ireland, so we've got 1.7 million cows, which is 17% of the UK is cows. So it's looked upon as being a fairly significant sector. So I was quite happy with 200 million as a chunky number I could do something with, but with area for growth. And about 3,300 full-time people, and about 700 as volunteers. Huge volunteering. You know, the people in this room know that the equine sector runs largely, particularly the sport horse side, on volunteers. Whether it's dressage, eventing or show jumping, it's all run on volunteers. And a lot of the breeding works the same. So the volunteering is huge in the sector. And I also asked Deloitte then to give me areas for growth. Areas that with a little bit of pump priming from government could actually move the thing forward. And not to get pulled down by the usual discussions we have in Northern Ireland around the status of the horse. It's not an agricultural animal, it is down south. VAT. It's not considered agriculture for VAT, so you pay VAT. You don't do that down south. We pay rates on, you don't pay rates in agriculture farm buildings, but you pay rates on equine premises. And we spent 20 years going around in circles talking about those three things that weren't going to change. But the industry kept banging around to those, so I had to get away from that agenda and talk about something else. And these are the four main areas which Deloitte suggested that I put a bit of effort into. I talked about the fragmentation. So someone had to stand up and lead it, and it looks like us within Deirdre are going to take lead responsibility for the equine sector within government. And I've set up at senior civil servant level a cross-government steering group with grade 5s from right across government. And I've got really enthusiastic people, because in beside COVID and Northern Ireland Protocol and all the things I'm not going to talk about today, like our 100th avian influenza in the UK this week, and all the other things that we've been dealing with, this is something that people are getting enthusiastic about. And I've got real buy-in from across the permanent secretaries in Northern Ireland, and it's across the senior civil service. The Department of Communities have stepped up, and Sport NI have formed an Equine Sport NI group to talk to Horse Sport Ireland, because up until now there was very little contact between Horse Sport Ireland and Sport NI, who are the funding body. And that came across about COVID. One of my staff helped Department of the Communities, Sport NI, with the mitigations for the equine industry for COVID. And that helped to build the bridge and helped communities, Sport NI, to realise that that actually was a sector here that they had to engage with. And that's a huge step forward, because that takes away from me the direct stakeholder responsibility for that, for show jumping, for eventing, for dressage, and puts it somewhere else. And that's good, and that'll be meaningful and hopeful. Cross-government steering group is there, and we have a Camália, an equine forum, where we get all these people at the end of a Zoom line, so that we tell everybody what's going on at the same time, so that we get away from whispers and people interpreting and all that good stuff that the equine sector likes to do. Strengthening the sector. This is important because I think it's common across the piece, and that's a very traditional sector, and we spend a lot of time repeating what we've been told. A relatively little amount of research done on very basic things, and I would say even things like, which horse yard do you know that you go into and they don't have 123,000 bits? Because you're always going to fix a horse with another bit, aren't you? Where actually, if you had a couple, it would probably do you. Because nobody's done the work, and actually it's just, you try something. Somebody should try this stuff out and then tell you what to use. What's the best surface for an arena? Well, you look at what everybody else does, and you ask them how it worked, and you do the same. There are a pile of things that need research, and we're going to do something about that. As I say, one of the jewels in the crown is Caffrey Equine College. This is it down in Fermanagh in our lakelands. That's something very interesting I could talk for another half hour on, which is active turnout. Take horses out of a square box and put them in a square paddock and expect that to keep their brains active. This thing is really good. There's a very good video online if you want to have a look at it. You probably maybe know about it already, but it is really, really good. There's gallops, there's all sorts of great things, but the main thing they produce is people. They produce great people. And part of my struggle is that we produce grooms that Coolmore, Godolphin, everybody else wants them after a 1-year training because they know their stuff, they're practical, and they've got people skills. And they go all over the world. There are alumni of Enniskillen in Kentucky, in the Far East, in the Mid East, but there's nothing for them at home. When they come home, the industry is struggling in the north, and they end up down in Coolmore or somewhere like that because there's very little at home for them, which is a real. And there's a School of Farrier, and we do all sorts of things with gizmos as part of their training. And we also produce there's a three-year equine managers course built on an awful lot of the stuff that they do in the other colleges. So we need to do a training needs analysis, and what we're going to do here is work with VHS, work with Pony Club. We do a lot of training in the private sector as well, and make sure that it's all joined up and the training is accredited so it has value out in the workplace. Northern Ireland has no bridleways. It's because of the way the farms are broken up. Very small farms, lots of hedges, but very much a get off my land attitude. Again, we've got a working group set up for this. Dairy itself owns 11% of the surface area of Northern Ireland, but getting together with other big landowners like the National Trust and the Northern Ireland Water, and trying to open up the countryside for leisure riders, for the Ulster Riders Association, for the long distance riding people, and to finally end up with a tourism offer, which is where we want to end up with. And we're starting a pilot in the southeast, that's down around Newcastle in the Mournes, and the red bits are the bits we have, and we're going to try and join them up to make a proper offering to give people safe off-road riding, because it is a real problem, and try and link that into the new farmer support post-CAP era of assisting farmers to do this. So, equine-assisted therapy and learning, I could talk again for a long time on this, but Deloitte identified it. I was very pleased as an area for great growth. We're small in Northern Ireland. We have the Equine College, where we're developing accredited courses, particularly in learning. Ulster University has already developed a course for the allied health professionals to deliver that. And we're joining together with health and education and justice in order to get the supply going. Because at the moment there's a lot of ad hocery, but there's a real big piece of work. And there's Robin Swan, a Minister of Health, out at Neue Water. My Minister, Minister Poots, at the Riding for the Disabled in Coleraine, Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, obviously, and Minister McElveen from Education, out with Simone McCambridge and Tully Newbank. So we're getting real buy-in from across the departments. and the ministers are asking their officials what are they doing about this, and a real chance again to move forward. Raising awareness, support the providers, educate and professionalise the delivery, and I have a really great private sector stakeholder in this, One Equine, which has set up to represent the industry and represent the sector to government, and they're doing a really, really good job under the leadership of Richard Moore. So with an agreed strategy, the equine sector in Northern Ireland has a great potential for growth. I now know where it is, and the things I'm doing are not the normal sort of things, but they're things where I believe will put money into the sector, support into the sector, training into the sector, and help to grow it, and I'm really quite encouraged. But at the bottom line, the equine sector can make a real difference to people in terms of outdoor sport and recreation, and there's a really big thing in the wellness agenda. And this is my sickness. This is what keeps me sane when I'm dealing with Northern Ireland Protocol, avian influenza, bovine TB, animal welfare, and all those other fun things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. So if Lord Benyon and the two CVOs could come and join us up here, we'll take some questions. We've had some questions on Slido. Are there any questions in the auditorium first? Any specific questions? We've got a roving mic. Yeah. If you could say who you are, that would be quite helpful. Not that we really... You're not going to be named and shamed, but just so it's just useful to know.
Thanks. Malcolm Morley, Vice President of the British Veterinary Association. On one of Robert's slides, he had mention of farrier registration in Northern Ireland, and my understanding is that NI is the only bit of the UK where farriers don't have to be registered. What can we look forward to in that area, Robert?
You're right, and I'm ashamed of it, which is why we're going to do something about it. I've run out of time in this mandate. We're looking at our entire animal welfare legislation, and it'll be in there, and hopefully it'll be in the next legislative mandate, in the next assembly, God willing.
Thank you. Two themes that have come through on the Slido questions. First, for the Minister, about feed supply chains and particularly wheat, which is pretty important as far as Ukraine is concerned. Does that have welfare implications, lack of feed raw materials going forward?
I don't think so. We don't know at this stage how imports and exports from Ukraine and indeed Russia will be affected by this. 30% of the world's wheat comes from those two countries. But we in this country have very spread and well-established supply chains for a whole range of different commodities. And I don't foresee problems. We are obviously kept watching the situation very carefully, talking to stakeholders, talking to our embassies abroad, and making sure that the agricultural and feed supply chains are robust. I think that in terms of what we produce, we can produce things, wheat here in large quantities, and indeed we are most years an exporter. But the wheat price has gone up to £225 a tonne for a spot price. I've never imagined in all my years of farming that we would see that. In addition to that, fertiliser prices, because of rising global petro prices, have risen dramatically. This will have an effect on concentrate feeds, mill and mixers, which I'm afraid some of which will be unloaded onto the customer. But we hope that this is a measure that will re-establish some degree of order in the years to come. One final thing. What also we need to remember is that 80% of the seasonal agricultural workers, and I don't know how much of this affects the equine industry, come from Ukraine. 80%. Many of them may still come, some won't. We are looking at other countries for imports and labour. And I know that in the racing industry and other elite equine sports, getting the labour you need to do the work is really important.
Thank you, Minister. David Mountford. Yeah, you shout. You're not allowed to.
Thank you very much. David Mountford, British Horse Council. Minister and CVOs, do you recognise the importance to the industry of having a smooth import and export route for high health horses? And what's your confidence that we'll be able to introduce one in the foreseeable future?
I'll start. Yes, I do. I mean, I think this is really important, and I've been getting emails from people who are saying that the delays are a real problem, particularly with elite horses going to compete, and they worry about the risk of them being kept at border posts for a long time while things change. I mean, we now have a third country status with the EU, whether you individually like it or not. That's where we are. And we would like that to be changed, and I'm quite convinced over time these matters will be resolved, because there are advantages in both directions. And when people think about this, they very often think about the short straits, but really the most pressing problem in terms of equines is sitting to my left. The Northern Ireland Protocol is unsustainable, in my opinion, and we'll have to find a way to change that. And our relationship economically across a great many sectors with the Republic is absolutely vital, both directions. On equestrian movements, it is our biggest friend and neighbour, but also our biggest area where equines are moved, and we want to make sure that we are really easing the passage in both directions.
Thank you, Minister. Martin?
Well, I suppose, yeah, I mean, ultimately what I would say is that I think we need to acknowledge, like, trade is actually happening, and it's happening well. It is an administrative burden and it's a cost. And I think, most definitely improvements can be made in the context of actually shortening that or making, and no doubt technology will in time make that easier. I suppose that it's the extent to which technology can actually come and replace, and the acceptability and the integrity, the ability of systems to talk to each other, and when that can be done. But I do think there's a willingness on all sides to actually try and improve that. I mean, for instance, like what we have now. I mean, I just saw some data yesterday. I mean, we have recorded 9,000 movements from Ireland to GB. We have over 6,000 movements from GB to Ireland. I mean, it has happened. So it is difficult, and it has caused difficulties, but the industry has responded. And I suppose governments have responded in the context of actually supporting industry to actually get this done. But it could be better. There's no doubt it could be better, and I expect it will get better over time.
What concerns me is the welfare of the unintended consequence. There is no controls on animals moving from Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK. There are the same controls coming from GB to Northern Ireland as there is to Southern Ireland. So your unintended consequences is that if you want to move horses cheaply out of the island of Ireland, you come through Belfast or Larne, particularly Larne, and you add 400 or 500 miles onto a journey. And I think the movement search says this has to travel by the least distance, but the horse is there, and what can you do with it? Send it back and add more to it. So it's those unintended consequences of this mishmash of rules that we're trying to apply now that is my concern about it.
Thank you. David Bowles, and then Rowley, and then I think we'll give it I have to pause.
Yeah, thank you very much for those fascinating three talks. I'm David Bowles from the RSPCA, and I'd like to look at the low-value issues. So and it's great that Ireland and Northern Ireland now have an idea of the number of horses in your respective areas. We don't have that for England, as far as I'm aware, and it would be good to get that for England as well. But the the issue is we know the interconnectedness between the three areas in terms of the dog trade, and I think there is interconnectedness as well in terms of the low-value horse trade. We found last year, for instance, a high-value horse coming into Swindon to be slaughtered from the Republic of Ireland, and I would expect there is a trade also, as what has just been mentioned, going through Northern Ireland into Great Britain on low-value horses, and I wondered if you'd had a look at that at the moment. I mean, the RSPCA World Horse Welfare, we think there are something like 7,000 horses in welfare need in England and Wales at the present time. COVID has had an impact on that, and with the high prices of feed going up, I think we had success during the winter because we had a warm winter. But I really fear that if we go back into this problem again, and with that continued trade, we'll have big problems. And I wondered if you could comment on looking at that low-value horse trade. Robert.
Yeah, unintended consequences again. And you're quite right. The volume of low-value horses coming into Northern Ireland from GB absolutely rocketed. 18 in a lorry, that sort of stuff. And taking advantage of the movement assistance scheme on the certification. Defra have looked at that for potential fraud and are doing what they can. But horses that you find are coming to Northern Ireland, stay a while, might move down south, free movement again, and then end up in the Netherlands for slaughter. What's that about? There's a trade there that makes no economic sense, and yet it's happening, therefore somebody's making money out of it. But there's what you know is happening, and then there's what you can do about it, and as you, from your seat, know that those are two completely different things. But yes, we're aware, and yes, we're doing what we can right across the jurisdictions.
Thank you. Yeah, Benyon, yeah.
Just to say that however efficient our digitisation and identification gets, and however simple we make it for the horse keeper, there will be some that will choose not to be part of this. And if we deny that, we're turning our eye away from precisely some of the groups of equines that you're talking about, and there'll be welfare problems, potential welfare problems. So I'm really interested in conversations, and we spend a lot of time talking about elite horses, and we talk about well managed and easing the trade and all these things. How do we get to the groups of people who have no interest in even the paper form of certification and simply won't be partaking in it? We've got to really make sure we are trying to know about every horse. It's not just because we're concerned about the welfare of that individual horse, but it's about disease and the impact, and being able to communicate with the owner and the manager at times of high alert. And it's these kind of things that we really want your help with.
Thank you very much. Martin, do you want to add anything? Or
No, I just to echo, I suppose, what Robert has been saying, in particular in the context of the engagement. I mean, most recently, even this week, I was talking to Robert about a case similar in this space. I was also talking to someone in Defra. So, I mean, there is collaboration across the various departments, looking at what might be happening and seeing what we can do about it. So, I mean, there is opportunities, as Lord Benyon said.
Lovely. I'm afraid time has rather taken over, so can I, on your behalf, thank our three speakers for what I think has been a useful starting point. So thank you very much.